Good afternoon. This morning we had a Zoom lesson, Miss Adkins and she recorded her part while students were interacting, but my part was not recorded. So in order to be able to post this to our Stratton Strong YouTube page, I'm going to go over my lesson again without students. So let me share my screen with my PowerPoint and take you through that again. We've had quite a few students consistently joining us for all our Zoom lessons, and we really appreciate those that are able to join us. We've covered several lessons about the Civil War. We're wanting to focus on about how America has changed and the factors that have caused that change. So we're going to do a little bit of a review with questions. And the way I had my students do this is I would have them chat me the answers so that nobody else could see. What I'm going to do for you is simply pause after asking a question, and I want you to try to think, search those brain wrinkles, and see if you can find the answer. And then the next slide will show the answer, and we'll discuss it just briefly. So here we go. This is the timeline that we first generated. And we use a timeline to put events in sequence or in order. We did that, and now we ask questions, and we use the information from that timeline to help us answer our questions. This is where we pull evidence from our text in a lot of areas. When did the Civil War begin? So take a look at this and see if you can determine when did the Civil War begin. If you answered April 12, 1861, when Confederate soldiers fired upon Union soldiers at Fort Sumter, you are correct. And that was found right here where it says Confederate soldiers fired upon Union soldiers at Fort Sumter. This was the beginning of the Civil War. There were other events that took place before that, but April 12, 1861 was the official beginning of the Civil War. Let's see what other questions we have. When did the Civil War end? So take a look at this timeline and see if you can figure out when did the Civil War end. If you answered April 9th, 1865, when Confederate General Lee surrendered to Union General Grant, then you are correct. And we find that right here, the Civil War ended. It's always a good thing to go back and look where you found your answers in the text. Underline them, block them, highlight them, whatever you need to do so you can find your answers in the text. Let's go to our next question. Who was the president of the Confederacy? Remember, the Confederacy is what the southern states who pulled away from the rest of the United States called themselves. Okay. If you answered Jefferson Davis, you would be correct. And we find that in February 9th, 1861, when the Confederate States of America was formed, there were 11 states that pulled away from the rest of the United States, or what we call the Union, and joined the Confederacy in the South. And Jefferson Davis became the South's president. Cause and effect. One thing we had reviewed in one of our Zoom lessons was the differences between the Union, or the North, and the Confederacy, or the South. And we found several areas where they were different. We found that in the North, the weather and their growing conditions were different. They had rocky soil and cooler, shorter seasons, which isn't very good for growing crops. However, the South had really good soil and had a lot warmer, longer seasons. The industries were much different. In the North, the Union had a lot of shipbuilding because they were right on the coast, a lot of logging. They had a lot of mountains filled with trees. They had logging, and they had a lot of cities and factories. The industry in the South or the Confederacy was mostly agriculture or farming, especially cotton. After the cotton gin was invented, cotton became what they call a cash crop. It was really easy for them to grow and sell cotton, especially using slavery, which takes us to our area of labor. Labor used paid workers and a free labor system, similar to what we have today in the United States, where if you do a job for somebody, you get paid for it. However, in the South, they used free labor, and it all depended on slavery on those plantations. The population was very different in both the North and the South. In the North, many people, lots and lots of people in those cities and those factories, and most of them, or a lot of them, were immigrants. And in the South, there were a lot fewer white people. Most of the population were slaves. In the North, they felt like, because they had a lot of Puritans, had a Puritan religion, they felt like education should be free for all. However, in the South, only the rich white people were pretty much educated. Everybody else was left out. And lastly, in the Union or the North, transportation for roads and canals, they were able to build those railroads and canals because a lot of the rivers in the North were very fast and very narrow. However, the rivers in the South were wide and they were very gentle, so they were able to use their rivers to transport their crops. So, out of all these differences, there's one thing a lot of them had in common. I need you to figure out what was the main or central cause of the Civil War. What was something that really created a big difference in all these areas for the North and the South? I'm going to give you just a few seconds to think about that. Slavery was the main or central cause of the Civil War. Slavery was free labor used to grow crops in the South, and the South depended on that slavery, their economy, their people, their lifestyle. In the North, people did not need slavery and they didn't like slavery. Abolitionists fought to free slaves and allow them to have rights, just like white people. Now, this is a map that we had reviewed about a nation split. And over here in blue, you see the free states are in blue, and the red states are South, or those Confederate states that pulled away. You can see it looks like it actually pulled away from the United States. They wanted to be their own country. And we had some states also called border states, and they were kind of caught in the middle. They had some slavery going on in them, but they didn't secede from the Union. They stayed with the Union, and President Lincoln had to be very delicate when he dealt with people in the border states because he didn't want to make them mad and force them to go over to the South. So here's the question. How many states seceded or pulled away from the Union in the South to form the Confederacy? Okay, hopefully I gave you enough time. You could even count those if you wanted. The answer is 11. There were 11 states in the South that pulled away from the Union to form the Confederacy. And South Carolina, right here, was the very first one. What state broke away and became its own state and joined the North? So it broke from the rest of its state. Let's see if you can figure that out. West Virginia broke away from Virginia to become its own state on June 20th, 1863. And you can see that right here. And for those of us in West Virginia, this is very important for you to realize that this was the birth date of our state. And this is when, during the Civil War, that we were able to accomplish breaking away from Virginia. There were a lot of differences between Virginia and West Virginia, just like there were a lot of differences between the North and the South. Okay, what is the highest law of our land? I'm going to change gears on you just a little bit. And for students in my class, this goes back to the beginning of the year when we were studying about the beginning of our country, whenever the branches of government were created and our forefathers had a revolution. What was the highest law of our land that they created at that time? So I'm going to give you just a minute to think about that. Okay, the highest law of our land is the Constitution of the United States. If you recall in class, we talked about how the Constitution is the highest law. All other laws, all other state laws and federal laws fall underneath the Constitution of the United States. It is our single most important guiding law of our country. So you need to always remember that. And just they created it in the 1700s when they created our country, but it has been amended, it has been changed, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. This is something new we're going to learn today. This is something that happened during the Civil War, and this word, I broke it down in syllables so you could see it because it's a tough word. It says emancipation, emancipation. And it comes from the root word emancipate. It is a verb. It is something you do. And that means to set free, especially from legal, social, or political restrictions. And this is what happened during the Civil War. Can you guess who they were wanting to set free? Here's an example. And it's not an exact example because remember that emancipate means to set free those that from legal or political entrapment. But I wanted to emancipate the bird from its prison. I wanted to set free the bird from its prison. Another way you could say is the bird was emancipated from its prison. This is what you want to do, and this is after you have done it. You have freed the bird from its prison. Those are some examples. In the Civil War, it was freedom for slaves. Now, the second part of this word that always goes with it is proclamation. Again, I've broken that down into syllables so you can see it. And this is a noun. It is a thing. It is a public or official announcement, usually a matter of great importance. And I have a feeling that it was a great thing to proclaim or to let everybody know and announce when this happened in the Civil War that the slaves were finally free. This is what a proclamation might look like. This one comes from San Francisco. Now, before we go into the next slide, I wanted to highlight for you that during the Civil War, you have the North on this side, and this is what the flag looked like at that time. It didn't have as many stars as we do today because it didn't have as many states. And on the right, we have the Confederate flag. Like I said, they wanted to be their own country. They created their own flag. This is the flag of the Confederacy. Now, this flag down here is from Great Britain. And the reason I have a flag for Great Britain here is so that you know that Great Britain was helping the South in their war against the Union. Great Britain wanted those cash crops of cotton and tobacco that was created in the South. So they were helping the South. And that's important for the next slide. I'm going to read this to you, and you can read it with me. And then we'll go over a few more questions about it, so pay particular attention. Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation was an order issued in 1863 after the Union victory at Antietam. Emancipation means freedom, and a proclamation is a big announcement. So this was a big announcement that all slaves in the southern states who were still in the war would be freed. The Emancipation Proclamation did not free slaves in the border states of Maryland, Kentucky, Delaware, or Missouri because Lincoln did not want to alienate them. He didn't want to make them mad and have them pull away from the North and go join the South. So, like I said, he had to be very careful how he dealt with them. Nor did it free the slaves in the state of Tennessee because they had already surrendered. See, Tennessee had been a part of the southern states that seceded, but it surrendered and it went back to the North, to the Union. This announcement by President Lincoln was done for the purpose of creating problems with slave control in the South. Britain had been siding with the South in an effort to buy agricultural products and to defeat the American government. However, when the South refused to free its slaves after the order was issued, Britain could no longer support the South. Britain had taken a stand against slavery several years before. Also, it is important to realize this proclamation did not actually outlaw slavery since it was not put into law. The 13th Amendment finally legally ended slavery in 1865 after the Civil War. Since the Confederate States did not recognize the authority of the President of the United States, they did not obey his order. Slaves were freed only as the Union Army was able to free them. And I believe a whole lot of slaves, once that proclamation was announced, that a lot of them escaped and went to the North. They even fought in the Army for the Union. However, the proclamation changed the purpose of the war from keeping the Union together, which is what Lincoln wanted to do, to freeing the slaves. So the war's purpose changed because of this document. Britain began to pull back from being an ally of the South as this change occurred. So what is the Emancipation Proclamation? Think for just a minute, everything we've discussed, and see if you can put into words, what is the Emancipation Proclamation? It was an announcement of freedom for slaves. Very good. If you said something about freeing slaves or an announcement of freedom, then you got it right. Let's see what our next question is. Did the Emancipation Proclamation free all of the slaves? No, it did not free slaves in the border states of Maryland, Kentucky, Delaware, Missouri, or Tennessee. What was the purpose of the war before the Emancipation Proclamation was issued? What was it Lincoln was wanting to do with the war? He wanted to preserve something. He wanted to keep the Union of the United States together.
Watch TV.
Just 1 minute. Honey, I'm recording. Okay. What was the purpose of the war after the Emancipation Proclamation was issued? Remember, the purpose of the war changed because of this document. So what was the new purpose of the war? If you answered freeing the slaves, then you got that one right. Let's see what the next one is. I think we're getting close to the bottom here. Which amendment to the Constitution finally outlawed slavery in 1865? If you answered the 13th Amendment, then you got that one correct. The 13th Amendment changed the Constitution of the United States and, according to the law, made slavery illegal. Okay, that's the end of my presentation for today. Just a reminder for you to read. You can read on epic.com. Parents can set up a free account. Take your AR test on Renaissance. If you need the link, I can send that to you. You should be doing your daily assignments on the West Virginia counties and sending me the answers to those. I'm not receiving a whole lot of answers back, so I don't know how you're answering those. I hope you're at least watching the videos, but I would like to see those answers sent to me. You can always check out mysteryscience.com if you want to explore some science options. Don't forget to practice your math on reflex. And we are not going to have any Zoom lessons over spring break. We're going to give parents and teachers an honest spring break. But you can do your reading. You can practice your math, your multiplication tables, practice that fluency. And I hope you have a wonderful break, and we will see you when we return. Bye-bye.